Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Songwriters on Process podcast. My name is Benno Papari, and since 2010, I've run the Songwriters on Process website, where you can find more than 200 conversations with songwriters about the creative process. I'm not here to talk about tour stories, band drama, how a band got its name, or favorite foods. My goal is to treat songwriters as writers, plain and simple. This is an intelligent conversation about the writing process between two writers. And today's interview is with Eric Burton and Adrian Quesada of the Black Pumas. We did this interview back in December of 2020, so it's about a year and a half old. And I believe that right before our interview, they had just been, maybe a few days before, had got nominated for the first set of Grammys. I say set because I believe they've been nominated for 5. Haven't won any, but been nominated for 5. And they are not a found sound band, but Adrian told me that he is mesmerized by the rhythm of his car's turn signals when he's driving. He said, I'm always superimposing a 6/4 rhythm on them whenever I'm at an intersection. He gets so distracted that his wife actually has to tell him when the light turns green. And that's not the first time I've heard that from songwriters. I mean, I've heard covered bridges, turn signals, car alarms, things like that. When people are driving, the sounds they hear when they are driving give them great song ideas. But anyway, I thought this was a great interview, listening to both of them talk and respond to each other's comments that they make. They were not in the same room when he did this. I think Eric was at an airport and Adrian was in his studio. You can also see the full version of this on the Songwriters on Process YouTube channel, so check that out as well. And with that, my interview with the Black Pumas. You know, I've been doing these interviews, or at least over Zoom, since March, and we've been talking with songwriters a lot about just the writing process, you know, since we've all been quarantined. How well do you write with big expanses of time, or are you better on writing with deadlines?
We operate very well with our due date being in the studio and working with Adrian, he's going to get the job done, coupled with my wanting to continue to come back and kind of paint and, embellish here and there. Once we're in the studio, we kind of have a way of getting things done efficiently, in the best way that, we kind of know how.
Yeah. So Eric, I guess just to follow up then, if someone says to you, I need this in 24 hours, are you the kind of person that says, do you thrive on that? Or is it with that kind of pressure with writing?
I'm sorry. Yeah. Most definitely. I operate quite well under pressure, actually. I don't like being there. I do not like, being rushed or having a due date within a 24-hour period. But I'm just the type of guy who is going to give my all and be in the moment, as I am called to be. And, fortunately, I'm very thankful that, things have kind of turned out the way that they have, in that as well. I feel like I wrote a lot of the songs in the studio with Adrian, who also has, kids and a wife to make dinner and, to do his thing with at the end of the day. So just kind of having that as, the pressure that is within the context of, what we're talking about, was a really interesting experience because, I just I'm learning more about myself in that, I've been able to kind of meet, the requirements to conclude projects.
Adrian, are you a pressure type person? Do you thrive under that? And I guess we have 4 kids, and so I know exactly what it means to have kids. And I guess I also like to, how has having kids, I guess, affected your writing process? Because I know having 4 kids, I feel like I have not many hours in the day to create. And so I know that I have to get that stuff done. So I know that having kids has made me a more disciplined writer.
Yeah, as far as how kids affect it, it definitely has made me like, as you just have to prioritize your time. I don't have a lot of free time. And I will say during the pandemic, there was a weird thing that happened is like, first of all, the pressure on me versus the pressure on Eric to turn something around and finish something is different because, he's writing the song, the lyrics, the melody. And I will say that my job might be a little bit easier production wise in terms of, if you told me 24 hours, to turn something around, the balance of pressure versus what's on him versus what's on me might be a little bit heavier on what people are going to play around a campfire in 100 years is colors on acoustic guitar and singing that. And they're not going to be like, oh man, and then that delay part that's on the piano, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
A little bit less. So I can operate under those because my life, I've learned to adjust like that. I have, as you said with kids, like I don't have a lot of free time. So when I have it, I have to maximize it, and, but I will say that it affected me during this pandemic at the very beginning of it all. My kids are home obviously now, and my studio for the first time in 5 or 6 years is not in my house. I actually moved my studio into a bigger spot that's not home. So it's a little more luxurious, but when I was home, I just wanted to create. And the only time I could do it was when everybody went to sleep, because it was just too much distraction at home with kids there and even with the studio. So at night, I, for like 2 months, just went every night and, had a glass of wine, a couple of beers, and every night the only thing my attention span could do was like hip hop loops. I was just doing these loops and just having fun getting that, it felt like. But I also have learned that I never throw any ideas away. Like it might be garbage at that moment. I just save it and I'll come back to it. And there's always something there, and I think we're both always documenting. Eric's recording every sound check with his, ideas that he has. I'm always just documenting things. So I think to answer your question, I think we do pretty well under pressure, but prefer to have a little bit of comfort. But yeah, as Eric said, there's that. I think it was Van Gogh. I can't remember what painting that they used to say that he would sneak into the galleries. It might not have been Van Gogh. I can't remember who it was. We used to sneak into the gallery with paint, and still kind of like
right.
Sneak, I think we both have that tendency if we were given that option. So, but I've gotten better at just saying at some point you got to put it to bed and move on.
Yeah, so now be honest with me, because every songwriter I've ever interviewed has told me that they have all those ideas that they keep in their notes app, on their phone. They always keep those, but then some of them confess they never, ever go back to them. Brian Fallon of Gaslight Anthem, he told me this about a month ago. He said, if any songwriter ever tells you that he goes back to those ideas in the iPhone, they're lying. So do you really go back often? Here's the confession time. How often do you guys really, go back to those notes app or those notes and say, yeah, let me see, I got to dust off some of these ideas. Do you go back to them a lot? Eric,
there's always, thank you. There's always a few, it's funny because I would agree with you. I have a ton of ideas in my phone that I very rarely revisit. But then there's about maybe 4 or 5 song ideas that I've re-recorded in different contexts. I might be playing it solo, and then I might have shown it to the band during a sound check, and just to capture different tonalities of the song through the different instrumentation and the people and different, the perspectives of our band members, and just to hear it in different ways. There's always a few songs that really just kind of stick with us. So those songs are quite revisited, but I would agree and say that there's quite a few ideas on my phone that don't get revisited. I kind of call it, I liken it to like the minor leagues of to the major league that is the album, right, or the potentials for the new album.
Yeah. Adrian, how about you? Do you really, so it sounds like you do, go back to a lot of those. If you're stuck, do you go back to some ideas and say, let me dust these off, revisit them, maybe this will kind of get me going, stimulate me again to create?
Yeah, not so much on my phone app. What I do on my phone app is I'll hum out a guitar part or like something like that. I don't go on the voice notes app. I don't go back to that as much as I do. Like I make quick demos because I have a studio here. I can knock out a quick demo and lay down a feel for a song, something that I remembered, and I can lay it down. I like to have my stuff all set up, ready to go, and I can knock those out pretty quick. Not that often, but I do when I go. I have to be like not intentionally wanting to find something, but like a lot of times when I go on bike rides and I'll just be bored of what I've been listening to. I'll just start listening like, and if I'm kind of distracted is when I'll kind of find those where I'm like, oh shit, I forgot that was, I gotta save that. So kind of combination of both.
So you brought up bike riding. I was going to ask you this later, but we'll talk about this now, the role of motion in the creative process. A lot of songwriters have told me how many ideas they get on walks, when they're gardening, when they're hiking, when they're biking. I interviewed Stone Gossard from Pearl Jam about a month ago, and he has this whole theory about cadence, about bipedal movement, about how the movement of the limbs creates rhythm. And he gets so many song ideas when he's doing those kind of things. So, Sal, how often does that happen to you when you're biking, when you're walking? Does that role of movement play an impact? And Adrian, will continue with you then to Eric on your creative process.
I think so, and now that you're pointing that out, yeah, I do think, I tend to like, there was times where I would just go take my basketball, go to my park and put on headphones and just shoot basketball. And there's a rhythm to certain things, there's a rhythm to basketball, and little things like that I think do probably influence.
Yeah. How about you, Eric? Does that happen? How often does that happen with you? The role of movement, whether it's, walking, running, biking, hiking, gardening, any of that stuff?
Completely, 100%. When I have when there's an idea, like say I go to the studio and Adrian shows me a new track that he just kind of demoed out really quickly. I'll kind of roll through a kind of a freestyle of a song idea to then take home. And what I'll do is I'll throw these headphones on, my Bluetooth headphones, and grab my tea, and I will go for a long walk and just continue to listen to the idea over and over, just walking through, the city. I'm very attracted to the infrastructure of like a massive like metropolitan city. So I really enjoy walking through Austin and, just kind of scoping the physicality and the beauty of this place in general, and just kind of allow myself subconsciously to kind of go into dream world. Or if we're getting close to, needing to record it, I'll go on a long run. I've gone on like 6.5 mile runs, listening to song ideas and writing that way to then get home and, solidify the vibration that, was, that emanated in that. So, yeah.
Adrian, so, and I think we'll follow Eric, I'll ask you this next, but Adrian, since March again, since I'm doing these interviews, a lot of songwriters told me, or creative people in general, have told me how difficult it's been to create. And the theater, actually, Eric, you'll appreciate this. The theater critic for the Washington Post, Peter Marks, wrote an article a couple weeks ago about how Shakespeare wrote King Lear during the plague, and he's anticipating all of this great art to come out of the pandemic. But I don't think any songwriter has told me, maybe one since March, that this has been a prolific time. In fact, it's been the exact opposite. It's been really difficult to create. So Adrian, we'll start with you. But is it difficult for you to create in times of anguish, heavy weight?
Yeah, I remember reading that about Shakespeare and at the beginning of quarantine and I actually felt really, like I said, really inspired at the beginning of it. I do think that there's been some low points where I just don't feel it. There was just some days where I just pick up a guitar and like, just, I end up just going on YouTube and like practicing guitar, just little exercises and things. There's days where I don't, that have felt heavy. And then I read this rebuttal about the Shakespeare thing where it said, you have to put context into the Shakespeare thing. Like, we can't put that kind of pressure on artists that like, hey, Shakespeare wrote it, you should be able to do it. Cause it was like Shakespeare had wealthy donors, so that's one of the things that article talked about was like people were paying his bills. Right. So it's kind of like he could have written that during the plague, or he also just could have written it after the plague. So I read a little more context to that because, but I will say I probably felt more inspired than not over the pandemic. But there's been some times where, man, I'm just not feeling music like for a couple of days, you know, or I'm not feeling like working on music. I'll just, I've been distracted. I've had other things going on, you know, but so combination of both, but probably more able to work than I thought.
And just really quickly, that's probably what I've heard the most of is at the beginning, people had this intense output, but after a couple of weeks or a month, they kind of shut off, like what you were saying. So Eric, how about you in those times? Is it difficult or is it easier to write?
I never really started making music generally to present it necessarily or to like have content to like to connect with others. It was always a therapeutic kind of going inside myself, so to speak. And life continues. It just goes on. And to be honest, as far as now having the pressure to produce content for other people to digest, it does feel that when we were on the road, just kind of being, in transit, I was actually coming up with more ideas here and there because we had more sound checks. We had more contact with each other as a band, and so now it's more of a journaling process for me, and music is just kind of my fuel. I still don't see it as this thing where, okay, like I have to hunker down now and make something to, change someone else's mind about something. It's always just kind of been a personal thing for me, as far as fuel for my own everyday life. So, I just hope that at the end of the day, whatever comes from my heart, wherever I am, will touch someone else's. And to a degree, I have been fairly productive throughout the pandemic, and thank God that we did have quite a bit of time in our traveling throughout Europe and around this country right before the pandemic, because I feel like there's been quite a few ideas that have been started and not completed in that process. So we kind of have some fuel to kind of go off of, just, based off of where we were before the pandemic.
So Eric, are you writing the lyrics? I mean, on that pure practical level, you're writing the lyrics, and then what role does Adrian have? Adrian, what do you have in that? The actual wordsmithing.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah. Well, quickly. I'm writing all the lyrics and the melodies, and maybe we both share the music, the musicality aspect of it. Like sometimes I'll come with a song on the guitar or an idea on the keyboard, or and sometimes I'll have production notes as well. And then for the most part, Adrian produces those ideas, or he'll have, like he mentioned, he during the pandemic, he made the hip hop demos and just loops and tracks. Especially in the beginning, he had these full, elaborate tracks to share. And so I was able to take what he had and write the song on top of the instrumental. And I'll let him conclude that.
Yeah, go ahead, Adrian.
Statement.
Yeah, it was one of the things, like Eric was saying. I remember being on a flight. We were on a flight, and might have been like to Europe. I don't remember. And Eric was like jamming on his headphones, and we landed. And I remember him saying, he was like, "Man, we need to work on more music so I have something to listen to." And it's like, I remember that it wasn't like whatever it wasn't Marvin Gaye or whatever. It was listening to like our process. I remember him telling me like, "Man, I just need something new to listen to," which is very much how we started working. But the process for that first album was before I met Eric. I had a few instrumentals that I had produced, and I didn't know I hadn't met Eric, and he didn't know who I was, and I didn't I had no context for like what keys are good for Eric. Coincidentally, he can sing in most freaking keys, you know, and some of those were pushing the top of where he had actually sang before, but no context for like what feels good for him or anything like that. So originally when we first started collaborating, I'd just be like, here, can you write a song? And he would write something and we'd record it. Sometimes even in the studio, almost kind of freestyling. Like he would just have a note of, you know, notes of ideas, and some of them were developed like that. But kind of became like officially became Black Pumas when we had knocked out a few of those, and those were cool, man. That was like Fire, Black Moon Rising, some of our early stuff. And he had already shown me his old catalog of songs that were, you know, everywhere from SoundCloud to, like we were saying, on phone memos and whatever. And that's when we became kind of like a band, and I feel like the record took up to the next level when something that came at its nucleus from him like completely written on a guitar. And my task was to just arrange it for the band and kind of produce the track a little bit. It turned out that was all serendipitous. I mean, not serendipitous. That was all just like working, you know, like every song that he had already written before he met me that he showed me, I'm like, man, that totally fits with the stuff that we were already working on, you know? And then I feel like those songs that he had already written were working so well with that's what we were like, man, we should do this, and we should actually play these songs live and everything. So it was kind of came from two different directions, you know, with how we started to collaborate. And now we're, you know, 3 years in, and like now if I'm working on some like a track and some production, I know like, oh man, this is, you know, this would be amazing. And yeah, I mean, I don't think we try to set limits on like also on this would not work or not work for the band. I think in particular with this new batch of stuff that we're going to start working on, you know, there's some ideas. I mean, Eric has been a performer for years before he met me with an acoustic guitar, which is where I think a lot of his songs came from. But some of these that he's bringing now are like started on a Juno toy keyboard. Some were started on this crazy organ. You know, it's like at this point, I think, well, I'm excited to see how we do this, because I do feel strongly that like it helps to switch up how you write. You know, like if I sit down and pick up a guitar right now and started playing, like the muscle memory in my brain and everything is gonna kind of do right away like something, unless I have like divine inspiration at that moment. It's just like gonna do something similar to maybe something I've already done, you know? So like Eric's is like, check out, he showed me this little Juno keyboard, wrote a whole thing on it. And I do think when you sit down at another instrument, it challenges your brain and your muscle memory to try something different.
I've heard that. Yeah, go ahead, Eric. Sorry.
I think most, like, to conclude that too, like what's really been amazing as well, you know, the fact that we both kind of, we jam on the same stuff, and, you know, we kind of jam within the same sentiment to a degree that, you know, we've been able to kind of, you know, share hats as well. Like, you know, like Adrian said, when we first started on some of the instrumentals that we kind of knocked out quite efficiently and quickly, where I'm kind of freestyling off of like different trigger words. Adrian, like he'd play the track maybe 3 or 4 times and like just loop the track and go shop on Craigslist while I just, you know, have my way with it. And you know, he'd hear something that I'd say, you know, referencing like maybe one of our heroes, songwriting heroes, like Neil Young or whatever. And he'll be like, oh, wow, like, what's that? You know, he'd say, okay, like, what about that lyric? Maybe go off of that. And so we've kind of we would share hats as far as that goes. And on the production end, I remember being in France with Adrian and hearing like a riff that he'd come up with. And I'm like, wow, like, what if we kind of took the production to a different part of the venue? Like, we're still playing soul music, but what if we played soul music over the rhythm of a capoeira percussion and like play something like that way and see how that comes out? So because we kind of, you know, we've connected with each other musically, to that degree, it's been interesting to see how the ideas kind of have evolved to where we're kind of able to keep things familiar for people while also being kind of innovative in our own right as well.
You know, Adrian, what you said makes a lot of sense to me because when I interviewed Nils Lofgren, you know, from the A Street Band, he told me that I want to say his wife bought him a harp, I think, and he started to learn a harp. I want to say it was a harp, and he talked about how playing on a new instrument allowed him to create things he never had created on the guitar before. And I have heard that from other people. So, okay, two more questions. One is the ritual. I'm fascinated with the rituals of writers, you know, where people tend to get their best writing done, time and place, environment, things they have to have with them. So Erica, I guess we'll start with you. How important is the ritual to your writing process? Is there a time or day or a place or things you have to have with you when you tend to get your best writing done?
You know, honestly, thank goodness for Adrian, you know, in my songwriting process, because Adrian, like I said, is like kind of he's such a rock and a bit cerebral about the technicality of the sound going in to of the recording, in the recording process, that like, because for me, I'm always writing. I don't have any boundaries, or, you know, it's just, I'm just living my life, and music and writing songs is just like an extra, you know, appendage, so to speak, that I have to kind of operate with. And in that, when it strikes, it strikes. Like I don't, I can't, I wouldn't qualify myself as you know, some kind of a professional guru at this. Like I have no idea, you know, but when, you know, it comes, you just have to be, I'm just open. That's all I can say, is that I'm open to the inspiration.
Adrian, so since you're a parent, right, you have no rituals. It's purely dictated by when you're able to write. But do you, I guess, in the perfect world, would you have some kind of songwriting ritual, I guess, creative process ritual, time of day, you know, things you have to have with you, stuff like that?
Yeah, I think because of my lifestyle, you know, as family man, I've my day has shifted to, like, I'm kind of a morning person. I like a strong cup of coffee. I like quiet mornings. I'll go out and, you know, run, go for a bike ride. And I like nature. And my brain is definitely firing like in the morning, you know. But that's not to say I can, you know, we were on tour for a large part of the last year or whatever, year before this one, and a half. And like, I can shift to the nightlife too, you know, but I think generally I've been programmed to be kind of a morning person tour. That's when I'm feeling the stuff. But I also, like I said, I can shift to kind of night. But in terms of ritual, like, I don't know, I things can come randomly too. I mean, just because of what I do musically, one of the things that inspires me a lot is rhythm, like drums, and like I have tons of loops and things that I've shared with Eric. I get inspired by cool drums a lot. That's where I'm like, oh man, if that was, you know, that's what I'm hearing like a lot of times, you know. And Eric's showing me a song, sometimes I'm already thinking like, oh man, the drums and the bass could be like, you know, I feel rhythm a lot because I'm not like a super vocal lyrical person. So that inspires me a lot.
So I want to follow up with that because, gosh, this must have been 8 or 9 years ago. I interviewed Fantagram, and one of the guys in the band, the guy in the band told me that one of the rhythms he got from the songs was hearing, it was in upstate New York, hearing cars cross over one of those old wooden bridges, and the sound of the tires over the bridge gave him a beat idea. So as someone who likes those drum loops, how often does that happen when you're outside and you hear something, in whether it's, I don't know, it can be anything, and you go, oh, that's a rhythm, I got to get into that?
My favorite brain rhythm game is the windshield wipers. I'll space out on the windshield wiper and superimpose a 6/4 rhythm on there, so it's like I'm always zoning out on that. Like I'll stop. My wife will be like, "Green light," you know, and I'm like, "Oh shit."
I was gonna say, do you rent different cars to see if different cars have different rhythms, right?
I hear a lot of the windshield wiper. Like if I'm stopped somewhere, you know, I'll imagine like drums getting funky over a windshield wiper.
What about the turn signal, right? That too. I mean, all that stuff. I know. All right. So, last question, Eric. Sorry.
I actually meant to say turn signal, not windshield wiper. Yeah.
Well, I can see the windshield wiper too, though, right? I mean, I could. Yeah. Because there's more variables. The sound of the rain with it too, right? Yeah. Okay, Eric. Sorry, did not mean to cut you off, but I do find that songwriters are voracious readers, far more than the general public. So you said you like to read, so I'd love to hear from who are your favorite writers, who do you like to read, and if those things ever influence your songwriting process as well.
Yeah, I'll take snippets of different things from everywhere. I've been kind of fortunate to have, roommates and friends who are much more into, poetry and, in their songwriting. I have a friend who uses poetry, maybe the first line of a poem, in a T.S. Eliot I made like a list of long poets, and like the biggest thing that I've taken away is just kind of being able to extract a line here and there to then dress, the message of a song with, in that. And for me, I really enjoy reading. So on a practical side, I really enjoy reading just about the technicality of songwriting and building the structure of a song. Like I said, I'm reading this book having to do with lyricless songwriting, because of the fact that when you show a song to people, what sticks first is the movement of the actual sound. Sound has a way of telling stories, and I'm learning that quite deeply right now. And outside of that, let's see. I really enjoy mythology. I really enjoy using astrology as a framework or a point of reference in the way that I relate to things energetically, and then just the science behind. I enjoy reading sciences, like into science about like like we have songs like Black Moon Rising and All My Favorite Colors. Like you'll hear a lot of references to nature, because I'm just very moved by just the beauty of it, and not being able to kind of fully describe it. I was reading about we have a new song that we kind of coined waves, so to speak, and I have recently been reading about the process of how, like, a bird, oh man, what that I'm looking for? Just the reaction, the innate reaction of a bird kind of taking off from the middle of the street when a car pulls up. You see the birds kind of like fly off at the last minute, and it's just been interesting to see and like really dig into the concept and the idea of these quick tense, like these quick what is it? The muscle tensions that happen, like when we when we react to something.
Yeah.
Just like I'm kind of blanking right now, but I just like to dig into things that like people normally don't dig into scientifically regarding the nature of our movement and process, and to then take that idea and relate it to whatever I'm singing about, that I may be able to do so from a perspective that maybe, the next person may not have voiced it. And which is why, in conclusion, the Thesaurus, Roget's Thesaurus, is one of my favorite books of all time. Because songwriting block, I'll tell you right now, songwriting block does not exist.
Wait, the Thesaurus. I just want to make sure I heard that right. The Thesaurus is one of your favorite books of all time?
One of my favorite books of all time.
I've heard it all. I've never heard that before. Okay.
Namely the Roget's Thesaurus, one of my favorite books of all time. Love it.
Oh, wow. So it's funny because you mentioned poetry. So few songwriters I interview read poetry. And it reminds me, you were alluding to that a little bit in that a good poet shows you something, maybe that bird or anything like that, in a way that you've never thought about it before. And that's why I love poetry, but so few songwriters read poetry. But it sounds like you're a fan.
I'm not going to front. I'm a huge fan of poetry and stories, and I think that I am even more so a fan of the actual practicality of our movement as human beings. I love to learn about the facts of life, to then take that and make my dream world seem real, to invite people. I use the reality that we all, and that we're all kind of inhabiting within, to make my dreams and my ideas more familiar and relatable to, in a universal way. So yes,
Yeah. All right, Adrian, we'll end with you. How much reading do you get to do? Who are your favorite authors?
Not as much as I'd like. I feel like do feel like, unfortunately, having my iPad has made my attention span shorter. So I'll read a little bit, and then I'll end up picking up my iPad and like looking on Reverb.com, and like my attention span has gotten a little skewed with that. So I'm big. I like magazines. I like culture, history, shorter, things. I haven't really, honestly, haven't read a book in a while. The few things that I was really kind of into was there was an author named Richard. Give me a second. It's I can Google it. Damn, I'm drawing a blank. He wrote a book called American Nomad, and he kind of delves into like these kind of cultures and subcultures and goes and like immerses himself and just kind of meets all these characters and tells all these things. I kind of read a lot of nonfiction stuff. One of the things I went down a rabbit hole for a while is I grew up pretty hardcore Catholic, but when you grow up like that, you don't really you don't ask questions past the Bible and the few things, and I always just had more questions. I was like, oh, okay, well then what about, so I kind of started getting into a lot of things like that, like the history of like real historical context of Jesus Christ, the historical figure, versus like just what they tell you in the Bible. So I kind of went down a lot of that, but I probably don't read as much as I should or have.
And that's it for the latest episode of Songwriters on Process. Don't forget, you can find all of my interviews with over 200 songwriters on my Songwriters on Process website at songwritersonprocess.com, going all the way back to 2010. You can read them, watch them, or listen to them. So until next time, thanks for listening.